Welcome to Jazz Time. Jazz Time is an online store that buys, sells, and trades authentic luxury watches. We make these videos so our customers can easily choose the best watch for themselves in the comfort of their own home. And if you like this watch and would like to purchase it at the lowest price anywhere online, click the link in the description below to buy it at jazztime.com. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Richard Mille RM30-01 automatic winding with declutchable rotor in white ceramic. I will tell you a little bit about the history of the RM30 and the RM30-01, and then I'll tell you where this watch stands in the lineup of similar RM30-01s. Then I'll tell you about specifically the case, bezel, dial, bracelet movement, and compare it a little bit to the previous generation, and then I'll finally put it on and give you my thoughts. So let's start off with that history of the RM30, not the RM30-01, the first generation. The 30 came out in 2011, and it was the first time the Richard Mille made a full-sized watch that was not a limited production, and it was one of their base models. That's actually right. Before this, the company had only been around for 25 years. They started, let's say, approximately 2000. I think it was like 1999 something, but let's call it 2000. So finally, after 10 years, they come out with their first full-sized RM that was not limited. And what I mean by full size is going from top to bottom, 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, this 50 millimeters. Now, it might sound like that's very big, and it kind of is, but that's not really the dimension you want to look at when you're trying to determine how big a watch is. You'd more look at the 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock position. That distance was 42 millimeters. So that is big, but it's not gigantic. And this was the first time that they did a full-sized RM like this. Before that, the predecessor of the RM30 was the RM29, which was smaller, is considered to be a size small. And even then before that was the RM10, which was about the same size as the 29. And even before that was the RM5, which was very small. So it started with a very small RM05, and then the small size of the RM10 and 29, and then finally the full size of RM30, and now they're maintaining that full size. So it's the only RM stands for Richard Mille, by the way. It's the only RM that isn't a tourbillon or some kind of special edition. That's the only one of 50 or something like that where normal people can actually buy it, and they have priced it at a decent price. Okay, so with that said, that's the history of the RM, and its position in the marketplace was it did very well. And in fact, it did so well that Richard Mille had it as one of their longest standing collections. It was in collection from 2011 to 2023, so that's about 12 years of service that RM30 was out for. And so there was a lot of them out there, and the price was not that expensive, or at least compared to other special edition ones. Which, like I said, are like one of 50, one of 10, one of 20, something like that. You get it. And so the RM30 had done very, very well. And so after 12 years of service, it was time for a refresh. And Richard Mille came out with, as you could imagine, naming it the RM30-01. So the RM30-01 is what you're looking at right here. And in this variation, I'm going to tell you about where this watch stands in the lineup of similar 30-01s. The 30-01 came out first in titanium and in rose gold, and so that means titanium, the case and top and bottom, all titanium, as well as one in rose gold, which actually a titanium mid case with rose gold top and bottom. And in late 2023, they came out with one in white ceramic, which is what you see right here. So right now we're going through only 3 variations, and I believe the RM30, similar to the RM30-01, similar to the first generation, the RM30, is going to be around for a very long time. Probably another 10, maybe 12 years before they do another refresh and make it a 30-02, who knows. So you can believe that if you buy this watch now, you'll be able to wear it for quite some time before they refresh it, because they just refreshed it last year. And it's their, I don't want to say starter watch, but it's one of the watches that I believe you can buy at an authorized dealer without having much of a purchase history. Maybe not every material, definitely not the white ceramic, but maybe the rose gold or definitely the titanium. But you can buy it at regular retail. But by the way, we are selling it below retail at jazztime.com, so you might want to go there instead, just saying. And I might not be certain that there is no wait, or you have to have a previous purchase history to buy that. I'm not so certain that you have to, gotta check that yourself. But at any rate, there is no purchase history needed at jazztime.com. We just require that you have money and you're ready to wire it to us. And you can buy anything you want as long as you have the money ready for it. Okay, now for that, let's start talking about the watch itself, where this watch stands in the lineup. So the white ceramic is what you see here, and let's talk about the specifics about this watch, starting with the case. And as I go through it, I'll tell you sort of the difference between the models of the previous generation, even though it's not a comparison, it's still a review, but I'll tell you anyways. Okay, so let's start with the case. Now, all RM30s or 3001s have a metal case that is made of titanium. They do that to keep the watch light. So that means the titanium, the rose gold, all the ceramic still have that titanium center. That is still where the watch is housed. It's what's holding the actual movement. It's the middle of the case, what you see right here. And then you have this top plate and bottom plate. In this situation, it is made out of white ceramic, which is scratch proof, by the way, and it looks awesome. And there is a long wait list for the white ceramic. So this is one that you definitely cannot buy straight away at the authorized dealer. You have to have a spend history for this, but you can buy it right now at jazztime.com. Anyways, it's made of white ceramic, and the only difference between this and the rose gold and the titanium ones are the top and the bottom plates. Alright, and now let's talk dimensions. As I told you earlier, going from top to bottom, the dimensions are 50 millimeters, and that's about as large as you can get on a watch. To give you some comparison, on a Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore, that is 52 millimeters going from top to bottom, and that is humongous. It's one of the biggest watches on the market, and so actually Richard Mille, surprisingly, is a little bit smaller than that. It's not quite as large, even though the Offshore is only 43 millimeters. Once you calculate the lugs and everything else you want to hit the bracelet, it's actually a bit larger than this one. I think it's said at the very end it was 52 millimeters, something like that. So 50 millimeters is large, but it's not the largest. It's definitely going to fill most people's wrists from top to bottom. Now, the size that does matter, though, that makes the watch look a bit too big and bulky, is the 9 to 3 o'clock dimension, and this one is actually only 42 millimeters. So it's actually even thinner than the example, the Offshore. And 42 millimeters is not that thick. If you consider the example, like the Deep Sea is 44, and there's no other 44 millimeters going from 9 to 3. There is a 43, and this is actually 42, so it is a bit smaller. But at any rate, it will fill most wrists. So I would say those who have a wrist size of at least 7 inches or larger could definitely wear this watch. If you have a smaller wrist size than that, probably should go with a different one like a 72, something like that. Now let's look at the thickness. Now the thickness, you might be surprised, I've put this watch on and worn it before and looked at, wow, it doesn't look very thick at all. But surprisingly, it measured at 17 millimeters. That's what they say on their site, but I'm not so sure how they got that, because I actually took calipers and measured it, and it was only about 15 millimeters. I don't know where they got 17. I'm not really sure how they got that, but at any rate, it doesn't look that thick. And it looks quite nice, actually. If you look at it profile-wise, when it goes on, you can see exactly what I mean by that. I guess they might have measured from, I'm not sure. I actually measured from the center too, and I did not get that 17 mark. But anyways, nevertheless, before we move off the case, now there's one thing that I want to tell you that's different from a full-size case as opposed to a small case, is that the number of screws on the case itself. There are 4 screws, not including the 2 screws that hold on the bracelet. So I'm going to call it 4 screws, that's 4 screws, but on the smaller version like the RM10 or 29, 17, whatever, any of the smaller versions only have 2 screws. 2 screws, or like the 67, a good example. The 67 is a smaller watch, it's actually a size small watch, and it only has 2 screws on the case as opposed to 4. And that's not always true, though, because I think the RM72, which is also a size small, I believe the 72 has 4 screws, but it's compacted somehow in there. But at any rate, the RM30 has 4 screws. That's one way you can tell that it's kind of a larger watch, because they're able to fit more screws into a larger space. So, it makes more sense. All right, now let's get off that case, and now let's move on to the movement. By the way, I guess, hold on, sorry, before I should say the RM30 from the previous generation, the first generation and this one are actually the same. They have the same dimensions, so the RM30, they're placed in the lineup to provide a full-size RM, not like the 67 or the 72. Those ones are small. This is a full size. They don't go crazy on the colors or the complication, and that's what keeps the price down, and there's a larger version of it, which is the RM65, which is a large version. This is medium, I guess. It's a full size. A 65 would be like extra large. And that watch is even larger than this. That it's actually not larger going up and down. It's going to be larger going the 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. That one is 44 millimeters instead of 42. At any rate, my point being that, yeah, these watches are full-size watches. Anyways, let's talk about the movement. And it's the same as before. It's the same as the RM30, the first generation. Now, where the watch actually differs from the previous generation is the movement, which is going to include the pushers, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the movement, just aesthetically, I'm sure there's a lot of little differences, but let's just start with some of the functions. So the first thing it does, obviously, it tells times. There's hours, minutes, seconds, obviously for every watch, but this one has a date. Then it has a date, but it has a big date, an outsized date. That's what they call it. So the date itself is quite large, and instead of having this huge circular disc on the old ones that went around all the way through 31, this has two small discs that are superimposed on top of each other, and DLC treated to give it this nice color so that it doesn't take up too much space on the movement. And it's at the 4 o'clock position instead of the 7 o'clock position. It's larger too, and it's displayed left to right as opposed to up to down. So in my opinion, it is just a much better way to display the date. It is clearer, it is also bigger, it takes up less space on the movement. Before the date wheel just took up a massive amount of space, and it kind of didn't look that great. Okay, also, what else you might notice in the movement is that the movement, instead of being very circular as it was on the RM30, the RM30-01 has opted for a much more angular movement where you see angles. In fact, you see diamonds superimposed upon diamonds. So if you look at the diamond here where the power reserve is, there's another diamond behind that, and it's very angular. There's no smooth lines, they're all angular. And in my opinion, it makes the watch look more futuristic, up-to-date, and just more beautiful, aesthetic, at least upon my eye. Now it has the date, time, and also it has a power reserve. It used to have a power reserve as well, but the power reserve looked a little bit more rudimentary. Now it looks a little bit more sophisticated, with colors going from 0 to 10 in red, then 10 to 20 in that dark orange, and then finally it gets to 40 hours, which means the watch would start to be wound over if you continue to wind it. And then finally it gets to 40 hours, and that means the watch is going to start being overwound if you continue to wind it. So RM has thought of this really ingenious idea. They call it the declutching mechanism, which is when it passes somewhere between 40 and 50, right around when it gets to 50, it'll go into the red zone, and that means that watch is almost fully wound. And to the previous watch being fully wound and overwound, the watch will declutch and it will no longer wind the barrel. And so that doesn't put any unneeded pressure and tension on the movement. And it does so when the watch goes to a power reserve approximately 50 hours. And so then you see this upper left-hand corner when it says on off, it'll go from on to off. That means the clutch is off and it will spin. It will still wind, but it won't wind the barrel anymore. And then once the power reserve comes back down, pass from blue, which was fully wound, back into the orange area again, which means now it's able to be wound again. The clutch will connect again and go from red to blue. It really is quite an ingenious little system RM to put, first of its kind, coming up with this on the RM30 in the first generation, and then they carried it over into the second generation. It's kind of a hallmark of the RM30. No other watch does this. It's quite unique, and I think it's really cool. It's kind of a gimmick, but it's a cool gimmick. Okay, now the thing that is kind of different from this watch and the first generation is it also has a function selector, which the previous generation did not. And that's at the 2 o'clock position. So in the previous generation, in almost all watches, you control the time as well as the date and the winding yada yada via the crown. So if you pull the crown down in the previous generation, just like every other watch, you pull the crown out and then you change the date. If you leave the crown in and you wind it in the first position, you'll wind the watch. If you pull it out, you'll change the date. And then finally, if you pull it out to a third position, you will change the time. That's normally how almost every other watch does that. RM figured out a better way to do it, so the crown does not pull out at all. It only serves to turn, and you see this function selector on the upper right hand corner, H, D, and WH, which stands for hours. So normally the first position would be set on wind. So if you just turn the crown, it'll wind the watch if you haven't worn it in some time, for example. And then you can see the power reserve move up. It's quite cool, it's interactive, not a lot of watches do that. And then if you press the function selector, and it'll go to D, and it'll change the date going from 1 to 31. And then if you press the function selector again, it'll change the hours, the time. And so that's great. It's something else that an old one didn't have, although I think it's quite cool. They don't do a function selector, but they do have a function indicator on other ones like the 67, but they don't have a function selector, which is quite cool. They do it on the 65, but anyways, okay. So that is the movement. I'm not going to get into all the little details, otherwise we'd be here for an hour. Now let's move on to the final thing, which is the strap. The strap is not really changed from anything else. I mean, it's just the arm strap, but I can say the difference between the first and the second generation is that the first generation, it has single vents. The second generation, which is what we have here, has double vents. And in my opinion, double vents looks much better. It feels much more refined and it's much more racing-like. Much more modern, and it just looks much better in my opinion, the double vent. Okay, now anyways, it's time for me to try this on my wrist. Now, I weigh 200 pounds, I have a 7.5-inch wrist, and yeah, what do you think about it? I think it looks great. In fact, the RM30 is one of my favorite base model watches that RM makes. Now, they make a lot of different models, basically 5 base models, and this is one of them. And it's one of my favorites because it's the full size. It's not too big like the RM65. It's not too small like the 67 or 72. It's a perfect size. And I think it just looks fantastic. I think it's going to have a huge life in front of it, like 10 years plus. And RM's going to sell it and make it in many variations. They'll probably make it in a black ceramic, and after this, maybe some special editions later on. But the RM30, it's a staple. It's a classic RM. Anyone looking at this will immediately look at it and, well, it looks modern, and it just looks fantastic, especially on the white. It looks superb. So look, if you like this watch and would like to buy it at the lowest price anywhere online, click the link in the description below to buy it at jazztime.com.
If you want to find out more about the watch you just saw in the video, you can just click below on Show More to see the full description. Then you can check the link next to Model as seen in video, click on it, and you will get to the proper page where you can see all the details. If you're watching on a mobile phone, you have to click on the arrow down on the right hand side below the video to see the full description. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. If you would like to share this video with your friends, you can use the share button below and share it on any platform you like. If you have questions, constructive feedback, want to tell us about some mistakes or misspeaks, just write a comment below. If you want to see more videos like this, you should subscribe to our channel and visit our channel page where you can find all the videos. And if you're interested in a specific watch brand, you can check out our playlists. If you want to check the price for a watch or want to buy one, remember at jazztime.com you always get a steep discount, so you should check the prices with us. If you want to know the price for a specific watch, just go to Google, type in JazzTime, plus the brand, model and the details you're interested in, and Google will find the right page for you. Thank you for watching.